Hello and welcome in this video tutorial about the grease pencil in Blender 2.82. This tutorial is intended for 2D animators and storyboard artists. This is actually my first tutorial in English, so I apologize for my French accent. So let's get started. As I told you, I'm going to use the 2.82 version, and it's currently available in alpha version. In order to grab it, you will have to go to the blender.org website in the experimental download section, and there you will find a Linux and a Windows version. So let's get started. When you open Blender for the first time, you should see a 3D view like this, but by default, in order to navigate in this view, you should use a mouse with a middle mouse button. But as you are going to use Blender mainly for drawing, you should use a better way to navigate. So we are going to change this in the preferences of Blender. So let's go in the edit menu, preferences, and you should have a pop-up. And you can go in the input section and you can enable the option called emulate 3-button mouse. This, as I said, will give you an easier way to navigate using a tablet. So now, if I want to navigate in the 3D viewport using the Alt key and my stylus, I can rotate around. If I want to zoom in and out, I can press Ctrl Alt, and dragging vertically my stylus on my screen, I can simply zoom in and out. And if I want to pan, I can press the Shift plus Alt key, and this gives me a nice panning motion. Okay, so what you should do is to practice this navigation a lot in order to be comfortable when drawing and when creating 2D animations. Okay, so now let's see how grease pencil works in Blender. So in any 3D application, you have different types of objects. For instance, you have cameras, you have lights, and you have 3D meshes that we usually call models. But grease pencil is another type of object in Blender. What I want you to do is to first remove this cube. So you just have to click on it in order to select it, and you can press the X key or the delete key and press delete. As you can see, you have a cursor that we call the 3D cursor, and this cursor is meant to spawn objects in a specific location. So for instance, I can move this cursor in a very predefined location, and I can spawn a grease pencil object that will contain my 2D drawings. So let's do this. In order to move the cursor, I just have to press Shift plus the right button of my stylus, and you can see I can move the 3D cursor where I want. So let's say that I want to move it there, and here I want to add a 2D object. So in order to do this, I'm going to go in the Add menu here, and I'm going to press the grease pencil blank option in order to spawn a new object. As you can see, this object is empty for now. We are going to draw inside it. You can see that by default it's represented by a small dot, orange dot, and this is actually the center of the object. We call this the pivot point. So let's enter in the drawing mode. For each object in Blender, you have different modes. Modes are located in what we call the header in the top of the 3D view. So here, in the top left, you have the different modes for the selected object. So in this case, we have the object mode, the edit mode, sculpting mode. In fact, yes, this is pretty awesome, but you can sculpt your drawings. We're going to see that later. But you have the draw mode here. Another way to switch modes in Blender is to press the Ctrl Tab shortcut. And as you can see, you have a pie menu just under your mouse, and this allows you for quick access to the different modes. So let's go back in object mode, for instance. This is where you can manipulate your object, but if you want to go in the draw mode, it's in the top of this pie menu. And now, if I'm starting to draw, as you will see, I'm able to use my stylus in order to draw in this object. And the cool thing is that it's actual 3D data. So it means that here you see that if I'm rotating, my object lives in a 3D space. But if I want to, I can rotate around and I can start to scribble in another view. And you can see that now I have a more dimensional drawing. Okay? So actually we are drawing in the view. This is because of this option in the header. As you can see, you have different types of projection. So in this case, I'm projecting my strokes on the view I'm looking through. But if you want, you can also change, for instance, the drawing based on different axes. As you may know, in 3D, you have different axes. You have three main axes, the X, the Y, and the Z. The Z is the height, the X is the horizontal axis, and the Z is the depth in Blender. At any time, you can look at this weird little icon in order to remember in which direction are the axes. Okay? So, using this, for instance, front X, Z option, it means that everything that I'm going to draw is going to be projected on this X and Z plane. It's like if it is a virtual canvas projected on the X and Y. So if I'm drawing here, you can see that it's sticking on this plane. So even if I'm in this view, as you can see, even if I'm drawing like flat on my canvas, you can see that it's being projected on this plane. Same thing for the other thing. I can project, for instance, to the top, X, Y, okay? And same thing, if I'm doing this, as you can see, it's skewed because of the reprojection option, okay? Usually, I'm staying in the view because it's more easy for me to find my way around. Another thing that you can do that is pretty cool is the fact that you can go in this option here and you have different options in the bottom to enable different tools, such as, for instance, the canvas. So if I'm enabling this checkbox, you can see that you have a grid that's representing the orientation of your view. So using this, I'm able to understand that my drawing is going to snap on this plane. Okay? Even though the grid is small, it's extending on the infinitely on the different axes. Okay? And if I'm going to the front XZ, you can see that it's aligning with this view. This is a small helper that will guide you visually. Of course, as you can see, it started not at the cursor, but it started at the origin of the object. Meaning that if I'm going back in the object mode and I'm selecting my object, I can move my object using this icon, for instance, and you can see that the grid, the little helper tool showing the grid follows the origin of the object. So let's go back in the draw mode here by pressing Ctrl Tab again, and let's erase everything inside this grease pencil object. So I'm going to press right click and I'm going to delete active layer. Okay. So now one thing that I want to show you is how you can assign a stroke color to an object. So since the beginning we've been tumbling around the 3D viewport, but there are actually other panels that you can see in Blender. In Blender, a panel is called an editor. So you have the 3D view editor. Here you have the outliner editor, and this is an editor where you can see the different objects that are composing your scene. So here you have your grease pencil object, you can see that you have the camera, you have a default light here, okay? So you can select back the grease pencil, and you can see that in the bottom right you have another editor, and this editor is called the properties editor. you have different tabs in it where you have different options. For instance, in this option that represents the data of the object, and the data in the case of the grease pencil is stroke data or field data. As you can see, you have different layers here. So you can add layers like in other 2D softwares, like in Photoshop or Krita, for instance. You can rename them, test, for instance. And if I'm drawing there and I'm drawing on the second layer, you can see that I can activate the different layers temporarily like this. I can lock different layers like in other 2D softwares. I can change the opacity right there, and I have different blending modes. But what we want to see before that is how do we change the stroke color of like the material of the stroke, sorry. So let's create a new layer, a fresh layer, let's call it test. And in the material tab here, you can create a new material. And for grease pencil objects, a material corresponds to two main things, the stroke and the fill. The stroke corresponds to, as it says, the stroke material, the stroke color. So as you can see, by default it's black, and if I want to, even after drawing, I can change the color of my stroke. It means that the data, the stroke data, is assigned to this material. A quick way to change the material of a stroke is to go in this tab on top. As you can see, you have all your materials that will be stored there, and this is just a replication view of this one. If you want to, you can have different materials for strokes. We're going to see that a bit later. The other thing is that, let's imagine that I have a circle like this. I can also activate what we call a fill. And the fill is simply the fill of your stroke. So as you can see, I can change it, and by default Blender is recording an area that represents the fill of your drawing. So the cool thing is that I can, for instance, draw like this, and as you can see, it represents a shape. So let's say that I want to a drawing like this. It's an easy way to draw. So let's clean this, right click, delete active layer. So if you want to, you can also remove the stroke and only have a fill. This is really useful in order to fill your drawing, as we will see later. And again, the cool thing is that this is shared among the strokes that you've painted. So it means that you're it's not mandatory to make a choice when drawing, like in standard 2D drawing. It's more like vector drawing programs. I'm now going to show you what a stroke is made of. So let's start from scratch. We are going to create a new scene by pressing File, New, General, don't save, removing the cube, and we are going to add a grease pencil object that is, for instance, a stroke object. And by default, a stroke object gives you access to this nice little stroke. So we have seen that we have a draw mode. So if I'm going in the draw mode, I have like access to the drawing section. And if I want to, I can also go in the edit mode. And the edit mode is where you can see the different components of your stroke. So in this case, as you can see, I have access to all the points that are composing my stroke. If I want to select multiple points, I can simply drag a box around the points, but I can also press Alt-A in order to deselect everything. I can also press A to select everything, and Alt-A again is for deselecting everything. And if I want to select using a shortcut like this, instead of simply dragging a box around, you can also press the B key, and the B key will give you access to the box select option, and now I can drag a box again. Okay, so I'm going to deselect everything by pressing Alt-A. Note that another way to deselect everything is by double tapping the A key really fast. So as you can see, you have the different components. It's actual geometry. It's like if you were modeling in 3D, but it's stroke. It's like 2D, 3D data, in fact. It's a blend. So one thing that you can do is that you can edit this by simply moving the points around. So of course you can use this tool that we've seen before in order to move your points, but I don't think that this is the right way of doing it in Blender. The right way for me is by using shortcuts. So the first shortcut I would like you to remember is the G shortcut. So let's select some points, and G is for grab. So if I'm pressing G, as you can see, I'm going to grab the points that I've selected. It's going to move the points according to the view I'm in, and if I'm left clicking somewhere, it's going to validate my action. So let's do it again. I'm pressing G and left click validates my move. While moving using G, I still have the option to cancel my move by pressing the right click or by pressing the escape key. So let's say here, I didn't validate right now, I didn't press my stylus on my screen. I can press escape and it cancels my move. Another thing that I can do is to rotate my points. In order to rotate, I can press the R shortcut, the R key, and as you can see, it rotates my points. If I want to scale, I can press the S key, and this is going to scale according to the center of my selection. So in this case, I can scale like this. So one cool thing that you can do using those shortcuts is that you can constrain the transformation you are doing on a specific axis. So let's say that I'm selecting this stroke and I want to move it on the Y axis. What I can do is pressing G because I know I want to move, I want to grab, and now I can press the Y key on my keyboard in order to constrain my selection on the Y axis. And as you can see, I'm now constrained on this axis. I can again left click to validate. Same thing for rotation. Let's say I want to rotate on the Z axis, I can press R, Z, and as you can see, it rotates my stroke on the Z axis. Another thing that I can do is also removing one axis and moving on many axes, on two axes actually. So let's say that I want to only move this stroke on the X and the Y axis, on the XY plane. What I can do is press G in order to move, and I want to remove the Z axis. In order to do this, I'm pressing Shift Z, and it's removing the Z axis, and as you can see, I can simply move my stroke on the plane. Of course, what I've shown you here is also available in the object mode. It's actually the same thing for every object and every selection that you are making in Blender. So if I'm going back in the object mode, as you can see, I can select my object as a whole and I can rotate it. Notice that it will rotate according to the center of your object, the pivot point that we saw previously. I can scale it and I can rotate it and I can grab it using the same shortcut. Okay? So we have seen that we can have access to the points of the object in edit mode. One quick shortcut to know is the tab key. So if you're pressing tab, you're automatically going to switch in edit mode, as you can see. So I'm going to deselect everything using Alt-A. And one other thing that you can do is instead of selecting points, you can select the whole stroke like this. So if I'm selecting this option right there, I can also press the 2 key. 1, 2, and 3 corresponds to those options on the top. So 1, 2, 3. So if I'm pressing the 2 key, as you can see, I'm going to select the connected strokes. So in this case, I'm selecting the auto stroke because it's all connected, and I'm selecting this stroke because it's, again, connected. So this is a nice way to edit your drawing afterward. Okay? So I'm going to show you, before diving into animation, another cool tool, and this is the sculpting tool. This is really cool in order to change to edit your drawing afterwards, but using more organic tools. So let's look at the sculpting mode. So in order to enter the sculpt mode, you can press Ctrl Tab again, and you can go in the sculpt mode. Here you have access to different brushes, like in 3D sculpting softwares, where you can simply push and pull your strokes. So let's say that I want to modify, for instance, this curve. I can do it like this, but as you can see, it's not very practical having a so tiny brush like this. What I can do is, of course, change the radius of the brush by going on the top of the software like this, of the viewport, sorry, like this, and change the radius, but it's not very practical again. So what I can do is change the curve, the size of the brush, using a shortcut, and this shortcut is the F key. So I'm pressing F, and as you can see, I can change the size of the brush. This gives me access to a more natural way of pushing my stroke. So by default, we are using this brush, it's the push. You can also use this, and this is the grab, and as you can see, it's another way to simply move your strokes. You can also use the shift key in order to smoothen to smooth your drawing. This is really cool. So let's say that I've made a lot of trembling line like this, and it's not looking smooth anymore. I can press shift and I can smooth, like in ZBrush, or like in even the sculpting mode of Blender. I can also add, like this, a random feel to my stroke. So I just have to go on top of my stroke, and as you can see, it adds a random feeling. This is really cool. And what I can do is also change the strength of my brush. So in this case, it's 0.5. As you can see, I can lower down the strength. It's looking a bit better. And the shortcut for changing the strength is Shift plus F. So here I'm at 0, and at 0 it's not changing a lot, and at 1 it's like going to explode my stroke. And of course, I can still use the smooth at any point using any brush. Using any brushes, I can switch temporarily to the smoothing brush by pressing Shift. So you have different types of brush here, and those are pretty cool. So this is another way to edit your drawing afterward. So now we are going to go back in the draw mode, and I'm going to show you different drawing techniques for the grease pencil. So one thing that is really nice is the fact that you can erase your stroke using the Control key. And as you will see, it looks like a soft eraser. So instead of going in the edit mode and just removing the stroke like this in a more crude way, you can still stay in the drawing mode and you can erase like this. You can also turn your stylus down if you have an eraser at the tip of your stylus. But I prefer, to be honest with you, to use the Control key. This is more friendly in terms of like user experience, I think. So one thing that you can do also is to fill your drawing. So let's say that you have, let's say that I have like this ball. One thing that I can do is use the fill button here, and I can simply click and it will try to fill my button. But as you can see, by default it looks a bit weird. In fact, it's as Blender has filled my strokes using stroke, because we have a stroke material. So in order to do this in a more logical way, what we are going to do is we are going to add a new material. As you can see, because we started this new project, this new file, and we just added a stroke object, it was not an empty grease pencil object, we already had some predefined material. So let's, for instance, select the gray one, and the gray one has a stroke and a fill. We are going to remove the stroke using only the fill, and as you can see, when I'm filling, it's going to fill, in this case, the whole view, because I probably have a mistake here. So here I can fill my stroke like this. And as you can see, I was filling in this way. It looks cool here because I'm in the view, but as soon as I moved up, it reprojected this on the view. So I probably should have stick my drawing to the XZ view. So if I'm doing this, as you can see, it has projected my fill on the Z and the X, but it was not perfect because I was not in front, and it reprojected from my view on this plane. So be sure to be in the right direction when filling the object. Again, it's the power of grease pencil, it's that it's a 3D object, it's not simply a 2D object. Okay, so here in this case I filled the whole canvas. In fact, yes, there is a hole there, but what I can do is press the Control key, and I can draw a small part like this, and I can fill again my drawing, and it will fill the rest. Okay, so either I can do this, either I can do this, either I can fill the whole thing like this using Control. Okay, but in this case I'm in a layer that I don't want to be on, so I'm going to be in the layer below my strokes, so the color layer, and now I'm going to fill everything, but again I'm going to close quickly the top here using the Control key, and I'm going to fill everything. And as you can see, I now have my fill here, and I have now my lines on top. Okay? So, one thing that is not good in this case is that my strokes are not aligned on the plane. What I can do, and this is pretty powerful as you will see, I can reproject everything on the same plane. So how to do this? I have different options in edit mode. So in edit mode I can select everything, and I can go in the grease pencil option. Sorry, it's not the grease pencil option, it's the... Oh yes, it's the grease pencil option. I can go in the grease pencil option, and in cleanup I can reproject strokes. And I can reproject the strokes from the front view, for instance. And as you can see, everything was reprojected on the front. Okay, so now it's aligned in terms of strokes. So if I'm going back to the object mode, as you can see, I now have an object that is totally flat. And because I have different layers here, this layer will be shown on top. And this is a way to organize in a more traditional way your drawings. Okay, so one thing that I want to show you now is how to animate those objects. So I'm going to create a new file, and we are going to dive into the animation part of grease pencil. So in order to understand how animation works in grease pencil, what I want to do is to start not using the general default file, but we are going to start using a template called 2D animation. So let's press don't save. And as you can see, Blender has set up different things for you. So for instance, you have the 3D view in the middle, but you have a white background. And this is due to the fact that here in the viewport shading, we have this viewport shading option turned on. And this is a render engine called Eevee, and this is set up for using a world background that you can see here. So if you're going to the world icon in the properties editor, you have the color of the world here, and if you change it, you can see that it changes accordingly in the viewport. So usually I stay to a white background like this. So if I'm pressing 0, as you can see, I'm going back to the camera view. by default with this template, you are looking through the camera. Okay, so the 0 key on the numpad allows you to go in camera view. If you're de-zooming, so if you're zooming out, sorry, using Ctrl and Alt while being in camera view, you can see the borders of your camera. And as you can see, by default, you have a stroke object that's been added in the outliner. You can see it here. And you are by default in the draw mode. So it means that I can draw directly. Okay. So I'm going back to the camera view using pressing the 0 key on my numpad. And the cool thing too is that you have in the materials, different materials that have been set up for you. For instance, you have the black one that gives you access to a more inky way, and this is not actually assigned to this brush because we also have different brushes here. So if I'm pressing this icon here, you can see that we are by default using this pencil brush, and this pencil brush has different options, and they are linked and it is linked to the gray. I think it's linked to the gray stroke, or maybe it's linked to the black one, but the opacity is lower. Sorry, I don't know all the setup, but the default setups of this template. But one thing that you can be sure is that if you're selecting the ink pen, you have a more how can I say, a more black stroke that gives you access to a more pronounced stroke or inking pen. So again, you can change the color, you can change everything that you want here, and it's still linked dynamically. So this is the cool thing with Grease Pencil. And if you want afterward, you can also activate the fill in order to add a temporary fill to your drawings. Okay, same thing than before. But the cool thing is that now we are set up with a default Grease Pencil object, we have a white background, and we have different brushes that are accessible right there in order to start animating. Okay, so you can see also that in the bottom we have two editors actually. One is a bit hidden here, it's the timeline, and you also have what we call a dopesheet. And the dopesheet in any animation software is meant for moving keys around, moving keyframes around. And in this case, the dopesheet has been already set up to Grease Pencil. By default, a dopesheet is for either 3D objects, either armatures, etc. But in this case, because we are animating Grease Pencil objects, we need to select this. So as you can see, because we have drawn something, we have a first key that has been created, and we have our stroke object here. So if I'm changing the name of this object, let's say test, you can see that it here it's still written as stroke, but I think this is a small bug. But in fact, we have the two layers that we created in our Grease Pencil object. In fact, they were created by default, but you can see that they are there. So here, instead of line, let's say, for instance, ink, and you can see it replicates there. Okay. The cool thing is that we can show layers like this. We can also lock layers here in order to protect the layers in order to just not make mistakes, in fact, like in any other 2D application. And we can also, of course, animate. So what I want to do is, as our first animation, a simple, very simple walk cycle. So let's do this. I'm going to delete this key by pressing X. I'm going to close the timeline a bit lower like this, because in fact the timeline is really useful only for the playback here and the start and the end input-output of the animation, but in fact the timeline itself won't matter in our case because we have the dopesheet here. So I'm going to close it, and I'm going to start at frame 1, and I'm going to create a layer, or change the name of this layer as sketch, for instance, and I'm going to use, instead of the ink, I'm going to use the pencil. Okay, and I'm going to create a new material. So in order to create a new material, I just have to create a new slot. So I'm clicking to the plus here, and I'm creating in this slot a new material by pressing the new here. And I'm going to call this material sketch. and I'm going to change the color of my sketch to a blue line. Usually I like to do this when I animate. Okay, so let's start by animating the contact pose of our character. So I'm going to create a very fast animation, a very quick animation. So we are going to simply create the contact pose like this. It's going to be crude, but it's just for demonstration purposes. Again, the sketch can be faster, even faster than this. I'm going just to add simple ends like this, simple like stickman with flesh. Okay, first keyframe, let's say. Now I'm going to go in another key, so let's say it's the key number 10, and I'm going to flip this key, this drawing, to be the exact opposite. Okay, so as you saw, if I just start to draw, it removes the drawing, and it starts a new keyframe, a blank one with my new stroke. Okay, but what if I wanted to create a new key, a blank key here? What I can do is simply right click and say insert blank inactive layer. So by doing this, I now have a blank keyframe, and in the background I have the onion skin of the previous frame. So it means that you can see in a light way the previous and the next key. This is because of this setting. So let's go back in the grease pencil tab. Here you have the onion skinning option, and here you have the opacity of the onion skin, meaning that for instance, if you want a lighter onion skin, you can do this, and you can see how many frames you see before and how many frames you see after. You can even change the way you tint the onion skinning here by changing, for instance, to a lighter gray or lighter green, for instance. Usually I like to do this, and I like to change the blue to a lighter blue after, like this. Another way to enable onion skinning on or off for everything is to go in the overlay section and to disable this option. You will simply enable or disable onion skinning for every layers. And if you want, you can also here in the layers, or here in the layers, it's actually the same panel, you can enable onion skin for a very specific layer by using this icon. Okay, so now let's draw the same pose but in an opposite way. So I'm going to create this pose. And now I have the hand a bit foreshortened like this. Okay, so now if I'm scrubbing my timeline, you can see that I have my two poses. Those are the main pose of a walk cycle. So what I can do is I can select this key and I can drag it at frame 20 for instance, and in the middle here I'm going to do my first in-between. Okay, so the in-between is going to be the passing pose. So I'm going to press right click, insert blank inactive layer, and I'm going to do my in-between. So I know that the passing pose leads the head to be a bit higher and the whole body is to stretch a bit. So I'm going to do this. And in this case, I'm going to simply bend the leg. So using the control key, you can raise a bit. And So if I'm looking at the hand, it's probably going to land here. Like this. Again, this is a sketch, and this can be tweaked later. So you can see that the head is a bit small, and the whole thing is a bit skewed. So what I can do is enter edit mode, and I can select the head. Using this option, I will select every connected stroke, so I can select here, and as you can see, it will select almost everything. I can scale everything a bit, and I can select my whole body here, and I can turn it a bit like this. And I can remove the stroke by pressing X, delete points. I can go back into drawing mode, and now I have a more good looking pose. Okay, so now last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate the first frame at frame 40, and I'm going to go at frame 30, at frame 40 for instance, sorry, and I'm going to go at frame 30 to change again this key. So here I'm going to create a new key, so right click, insert new active layer, and I'm going to recreate this pose but at frame 30. What I can do is I can actually go in edit mode. I can select everything, Ctrl C. So select everything by pressing A. I can press Ctrl C, go to frame 30, Ctrl V, and I can move my drawing to the right by pressing G and X, and this gives me a temporary reference for creating the same pose but in reverse. Okay, right now I can go to the edit mode, select my reference, remove it, and I'm good to go. So as you can see, I have a simple walk animation. So the last thing to do is of course adding the down pace, the down pass, sorry. So I'm going to insert a blank here, and the down is more or less something like this. I'm going to exaggerate it a lot. And I'm going to go in edit mode, selecting the head. I'm going to put the head down a bit more. And I'm going also to go in the sculpt mode right now, changing the scale of my brush, pressing F. And I'm going to adjust a bit the pose here. So if you scrub, you can see that you have the down pose. And maybe the whole thing is a bit too small, so I'm going to change everything a bit. So as you can see here, in this case I made a mistake. I've created a new pose. So what I can do is select this key and just put it on top of the key that I wanted to draw in, and this overwrites the key. Next thing that I can do is, for instance, let's duplicate the 6th key here at frame 25. I'm going to put this one at 5, and this is going to be another down pose, and just for the sake of the tutorial I'm going to simply spend less time, and I'm going to simply mirror the pose like this, even though it's not good. It's not a good way to do things, but it's to speed up a bit some things. And it's a sketch, so and now if I'm playing this animation by pressing spacebar, you can see how it feels. What I can do is I can change the end of my timeline to be frame 39, and I can see my animation playing in a loop. What I can also do is to select every keys by pressing A, and I can put my timeline playhead at the frame 1, and I can scale my keys according to where my cursor is. So if I'm pressing S, you can see it's gonna scale my keys accordingly. So I'm going to do this like maybe like this, and I'm going to put my timeline at frame 23, the end of my animation at frame 23. So you can see it's a more sped up walk. So of course I missed the high pass. We're not going to do this because it's not the goal of this tutorial. But if I want to, I can retime everything. So remember when in edit mode we learned how to press B in order to select? You can do the same thing here. You can press B and you can select multiple keys. So here I'm going to retime a bit everything, and I'm going to put my end playtime here. And the shortcut for doing this is Control End, or Control End. It's probably the only time you're going to use this key. So now that we have a sketch of this animation, one thing that we can do is, of course, at this point, if you want to, you can also change the color of your sketch. This is pretty cool. And one thing that we are going to do is we are going to finalize our drawings using a new layer. So I'm going to add a new layer on top, and this layer is going to be called ink. Okay, so I'm going to press spacebar in order to stop, and even though I'm in the ink layer, I'm going to go in the draw section. I'm going to switch to black, for instance, here, and I'm going to switch my ink pen to my ink pen. So what I was saying is, even though I'm on the ink layer here, if I'm pressing Control, you can see that I can still erase what is below. And this is an issue, so what we're going to do is we're going to protect the sketch layer. So I'm going to click on this lock icon in order to protect the sketch layer. And now I can start to draw my inking things. So as you can see here, it's really hard to draw a perfect circle. So what I can do is I can also use predefined shapes, such as this. So I can select this shape and I can create a perfect circle if I want to. And the cool thing is that with those shapes, I can press escape to cancel, is that I can predefine the radius of my stroke. So let's say that I want a, so escape, let's say that I want a 15 pixel or 14 pixel shape. I can do this here. And I don't think that I can change this while manipulating the shapes, but you can see that it's still pretty cool having those shapes. If you want to validate your curve, what you have to do is to press the space key or the enter key. Okay, so of course I'm not going to use those those shapes because it's too easy, but it was just for me, I mean, to show you those tools. So you can see here you have bezier line, so you can draw one point, another point, and then in the middle you have two manipulators that gives you access to those nice shapes. You can press enter again in order to validate. One thing that you can do is also use a curve here in order to define the profile of your strokes. So as you can see now, it's thinner at the end and it's more wide in the middle. So this is a more calligraphic curve, as you can see here. One other thing that you can do is to just, for instance, change the points here. So let's say that I want a more sharp curve. You can do something like this. You have different types of like handles. So for instance, you have vector handle, and here you will have a more pointy curve here. Let's say something like this. It's totally weird, but it's just to show you the purpose of this tool. As you can see, the weight profile is different. Of course, you have simple curves also. This is pretty useful. So this is a simple Bezier curve, and you have lines too. So each time you have to validate using the space key. One thing that you can do is you can also press while you are generating the the shape, you can also press the E key. So if you're pressing E, you are just going to start a new line from the last point. And this is quite interesting for creating multiple shapes in a row. I think this is also possible using the other shape. So let's draw a circle here. I can press E, and no, it's not possible using the circle, sorry. So let's go back using our drawing tool here. I'm going to try to draw perfect circle. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be a bit shaky, but it's not a problem. I can go in the option section here and I can add smoothness to my brush. So here I can increase the smooth, and you will see that afterwards when I release my pen, it tries to smooth a bit my shape. I can increase the iteration amount to do this a bit better, and as you can see, it works best. So let's say that I'm happy with this shape. I'm going to select this shape, and in edit mode I'm going to scale it a bit, and I'm going to Ctrl C and going to the other keys, and I'm going to adapt this shape to my drawing. So here, Ctrl V, so here the shape should be there instead. So here, Ctrl V in order to paste my shape, and the last key is just the first one, so I'm going to select the key and placing the key at the end. So as you can see, using one drawing, I've made my head. So what I can do is afterward I can sculpt the shape, of course, if I'm not really happy with how my circle turned out. But this is just a matter of improvement. So let's finish the body. I'm going to the draw mode. So as you can see, I've finished inking the character. It's it's done really quickly, but that's just for this tutorial. It's just for being fast. And as you can see, if I want to remove the sketch, I can do this by simply pressing this this button here, and this will hide the sketch. Okay, I've seen that at some frame I had some small mistakes here. Usually you can fix them by going in the edit mode, grease pencil, and you have cleanup, and you can delete loose points, but sometimes it won't work, so you just have to manually clean the mistakes. And as you can see, I've drawn this on the wrong key. So okay. Again, I won't bother creating a better inking in this case because it's just for a tutorial. Okay, maybe here, clean up some things, and we're good to go. So next thing to do is to fill the character. So in order to do this, I'm going to protect my inking, and I'm going to go to the fill layer, and this one again is going to be sketch. I don't know why I've renamed it. And I'm going to the fill, and I'm going to select, let's say, the gray material here. I'm going to remove stroke, and I'm going to fill my character like this. So what I can do is either fill like this, or I can use again the paint bucket. So I can use the paint bucket in this case, but I will have to fix some area, some open area, like this one, I think, in this case. No. Maybe this one. Yes. Okay, so I've drawn on at key 0, I'm just putting it back at key 1. Okay, so right click, insert new keyframe. Here I'm sure it's going to be bad. I think it's sometimes easier for poses like this to just create up the outer shape. And the cool thing is that even with fields, I can go to sculpt mode and I can push the fill like this. Let's go back to this one. I'm going to fill the head, not the full body, unfortunately. What I could have done too is to simply copy the fill of the other pose to this one, but now I'm in this process, it's okay. And let's do it for this one, for instance. So I can simply copy the fill to this one, and as you can see, it's going to be almost okay. So now I have my character filled. What I can do now is to tweak, of course, different things, and I'm going to show you different things using this this new object. Okay, so I'm going to first remove the last key of my object like this. So I cannot do it because I have some layer locked, so I'm going to do it right now. Now it's going to be okay. And as you can see, my sketch layer, I'm going to just remove it because I don't want to see it. And what I want to do now is to add some modifiers on top of my object. So we are going to see this right now. So modifiers in Blender are usually applied on 3D objects, but now we can add them to 2D objects as well. So I'm going to rename this object like something like character. And I'm going also to place the pivot of the object to the feet of the character. So as you can see, when I'm moving the object or rotating it, it's going to be rotated according to the center of the object. So what I can do is I can stop the animation, I can enter in edit mode of the object, I can select a bit using the point, I can select where the feet should be, something like this, and I can say to Blender where the 3D cursor will be snapped to. And I want the cursor to be snapped there. But as you can see in this template, because we have chosen new 2D animations template, we cannot see the 3D cursor. We need to activate it, so we need to go in this viewport display, viewport overlay option, and we need to enable the 3D cursor. As you can see, it's in the middle of the scene. What we want to do is to snap the cursor to the feet of the character. So because I have those points selected, what I can do is I can press Shift S and I can say cursor to selected, and it's going to select the midpoint or like an average of those points. So now my cursor is there, but not my origin. So what I can do is go back to the object, Control Tab object mode, and I can press right click and I can set origin to 3D cursor. And now you can see that the origin of the object is no more in the middle of in the torso of the character, but rather near the feet. And this is cool because now when I rotate my character around its feet. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to assign, as I told you, modifiers to this object. So I'm going to extend my timeline to frame like something like 200 or something like this. And as you can see, my character stops playing because this is not a cycle. So the first thing I want to do is to create a cycle using my using a modifier. So I'm going to select this wrench icon here, where you can stack different modifiers, and I'm going to add a modifier on top of all my objects, and I'm going to select the time offset modifier. This is going to help me in order to cycle some frames. So I want a custom range from frame 1 to frame 20, because it was actually where my frame ends, and I want to check the keep loop animation. And as you can see right now, my character is playing infinitely. I can also duplicate my object. So in order to duplicate an object, you can either press Shift D and it's going to copy perfectly the object. In terms of, it's going to be a deep copy. If I want to, I can also create an instance of this object by pressing Alt D. And the difference between a copy and an instance, so this is an instance and I'm going to press Shift D. The difference between a copy that is like standard copy, like default copy with Shift D, and an instance is that if I'm modifying the instance, so let's draw something using a brush. Let's go this frame and let's go in the ink. If I'm adding a stroke, you can see it's being replicated to all instances that are being shared together, that are sharing the same stroke information. But this one was a deep copy, so it didn't share the information. Okay, so I'm going to delete this one and I'm going to place this object back to the origin. If you want to cancel a transformation, you can press Alt plus the letter of the transformation. So we saw before that we can press G in order to move. If you want to cancel the movement, you can press Alt G. Same for rotation. If you're rotating, for instance, I'm rotating the object like this. If I want to cancel the rotation, I can press Alt R, and same for scale. If I'm scaling the object, I want to cancel the scale, I can press Alt S. So let's press Alt G to move my object where it was created initially. Okay, so now we have this first modifier. Another modifier that we can add on the stack is, for instance, the noise modifier. As you can see, the noise modifier will add trembling lines. This gives what we call a faux fix style of animation, and this can be tweaked. I just want to add a bit of trembling line, not that much. You can also play with the step to make the noise happen with a 2-frame offset. Another thing that you will want to do is to, for instance, add a thickness modifier that will affect the overall thickness of your mesh, of your strokes. So this could be interesting. I don't want to do this in this case. And one other thing that you can do is to add, for instance, a smoothing modifier, and you will see that it will try to smooth the lines. It's not working really well in this case, but anyway, it's there. Then you can also change the hue, saturation, and the tint of the object. So let's add a tint. As you can see, the tint is changing the whole tint of the object. So we are going to change it to a red color. And if you want to only change the field, you can also select the material that you want to change. For instance, let's say I want to change only the gray material, and it's going to override the color, the tint of this material. Okay, but I don't want to do this. I'm pretty happy with the fact that it works like this. So let's duplicate this object like this, and let's say that I want to make three characters. And now this one, what I can do is also override the color, because it's happening on top of the object. Materials are not shared between different objects, and this is the cool thing. It's a non-destructive workflow. And the cool thing is that I can also say, okay, now let's offset by 1 keyframe this character in order to make a different head bounce. So I can do this with the 3 characters. And this one, let's put it orange, like a traffic light. So this is where Grease Pencil shines. You can actually make object live in a 3D space. As you can see here, I have 3 characters that are in 3D, and I can of course push them to different locations. And if I'm looking through the camera and I'm selecting the camera and I'm looking through the camera, if I'm moving the camera, you can see that you have a natural parallax effect that works. And this is because it's 3D. So if I want to move the camera forward, it's like pressing G and Y. I can also do this while being in the camera view. As you can see, you have the border of the camera here that you can select. And if I'm pressing G and Y, it's like if I'm moving the camera because I've been able to select it in this view. And you can of course animate your camera. So if you want to animate a camera, you will have to, or any object in Blender, you will have to leave the Grease Pencil dopesheet. So let's say that I want to make this character move from there to the opposite view. Okay, so I'm going to bring back those objects to the center. Let's remove, let's take only one. And I want to make this move from this point to this point. So I'm going to put this character off screen, and I'm going to go in the dopesheet now. As you can see, the dopesheet is empty in terms of keys, and this will represent the location of the object, the transformation of the object. So we are going to insert a key here. In order to insert a key on an object, you press the I key. So I'm pressing I, location. So I, and you have a drop-down menu that asks you what do you want to key. In this case, I want to key the location, the position of the object in the world. And I'm going to add frame, let's say 100. I'm going to move the character GX to the other side of the screen. And I'm going to key again my location. So location. And as you can see, my character is now walking. So in fact, the object is moving, and inside the Grease Pencil is being animated. As you can see, my character is moving in a slow, in an acceleration way, and slow in and slow out motion. We don't want this. This is due to the fact that the curves are smooth. So if we look to another type of editor, so the graph editor here, so you can switch between different types of editor using this icon here. You can go to graph editor, and you can see that the red curve here corresponds to the X location of the character. So you can see that at frame 1 it starts here, and it starts to take speeds to accelerate. Here it's at maximum speed, and at the end it slows down. Hence the slow in, slow out motion. So what we can do is we can select those keys, and we can press the T key. So the T key, and we can say, I want this to be linear. And now you can see that I have a constant speed for my animation. So my 2 keys are set of type linear. As you can see, it moves now in a linear way. And if you go back to the dopesheet, by the way, a nice shortcut to know is Ctrl Tab while the mouse is in the middle of the dopesheet or the curve editor in order to switch back and forth between those two. And if you go back in the dopesheet, you can see that now you have 2 keys that are joined by a green line, and this says that it's a linear motion from one key to another. It's a way to know this in the dopesheet. Okay, so this was a way to animate an object, and of course, as I told you, cameras are objects. So what you can do is, of course, you can animate cameras like this. So let's say that I'm going to frame 1, and I'm going to press Y to move a bit in front. I'm going to press I like insert, in order to add a key, and I'm going to go at frame 100, Y to move back a bit, Y again, like insert location. And as you can see now, I have an animation of my camera, and my camera again slows in, slows out. If I move out of my scene, you can see it. And this is a way to do this. Again, Control Tab in the dopesheet, you can see that my Y keyframe is there, and this is the Y axis of the camera. A nice tip in order to remember the colors, which colors is which axis, is to think of RGB, like red, green, blue, is corresponding to X, Y, and Z. So the G is Y. So if you want to zoom in this viewport, it's the same thing. You can use Control and Alt. You can see that you can squish and stretch the curve editor. You can press Alt in order to move. You can press Shift and Alt. It's the same thing actually, because it's in 2D. Okay, so now you've seen how objects works in the grease pencil. We have seen animation. We have seen a bunch of things, in fact. The last thing that I want to show you is a scene I'm working in. This is really work in progress right now, but I want to show it to you because I added one last thing that I didn't mention in this tutorial, is how could we edit different scenes. Okay? So I'm going to save this one and I'm going to show you the scene I'm working in. Or you know what? Let's do it with this scene, because I think it's better to first see it in action, and then I'm going to show you my scene. So in Blender you have what we call scenes. So here in the top header you have scene. This is the default name, and let's call it my scene or shot A. Usually we write shot for different shots in Storyboard. So this is my shot A. Now let's do a copy of this scene, a full copy. So I'm going to press this new icon and I'm going to say copy. If you say linked copy, be aware of the fact that you're going to create like instances of the scene. So when you're going to change an animation in a scene, you are going to affect the objects that were linked, so they are going to be instances, so it's probably not what you want. So let's do a full copy, and now I have shot A.001. I'm going to rename it shot B, and now if I'm selecting this drop down menu, I have shot A, shot B, and because they look the same, of course it's not going to be very different here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my camera, I'm going to press Ctrl Tab to go in the dopesheet. I'm going to remove the keys, so X, delete keyframe, so I want a still camera for this shot. And I'm going to, let's say, select this character and I'm going to make it like green. Okay, this is my shot B. Okay, and why not? I'm going to go in the top view. So in order to go in the top view, you can press the 7 key in Blender. If you want to go in the front view, you can press the 1 key, and if you want to go in the side view, you can press the 3 key. So I'm going to the 7. I'm going to press 7 in order to go in the top view, and I'm going to duplicate many characters like this. And as you can see, they are going to share the same animation, of course. So they are going to be at the same location, and this is not what I wanted. So I'm going to remove this animation from my character. So I'm going to select every other character, select the one and only one that has no animation data, and I'm going to duplicate them like this. So now I have many characters like this, and they are standing still on the they are moonwalking on the ground. And you know what, let's add some fancy stuff, fancy colors, fancy random colors, and let's add times offsets for this scene just to make it a different scene. Okay, so let's say that I have this. And this is my shot B. And now if I'm going back to shot A, I still have my character walking from left to right. Okay? So what I want to do now is I want to set up a new scene. So let's create a new scene like this. And this is going to be a totally new scene. So I'm going to press new and I'm going to call this scene edit. And this is going to be a scene that will be responsible for editing the different shots together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the plus icon there and I'm going to add a new workspace and I'm going to add a video editing workspace. And now I am in the video sequence editor of Blender, and here I can add different shots together. So you can see in the bottom line here you have a timeline where you can add different scenes. So let's add a scene. So I'm going to press Shift A and I'm going to add a shot A. Okay, this is my first shot, and as you can see, when I'm pressing space, I can see my shot A. I can change the timing of my shots by moving this handle at the end. So I'm going to do this here. And I'm going to press Shift A again, and I'm going to add shot B. And as you can see, I now have my shot B. And I can, again, change the in and out range. And as you can see, it's a pretty easy way to start editing your shot together. So let's say that I want to go to shot A, for instance. So I'm moving to shot A. I need to move back to the 2D animation, for instance, here place. Let's say that here I'm adding a new object. So I'm going back to object mode. I'm placing my cursor with shift right click again, pressing Shift A. I'm going to add a grease pencil object. And in this grease pencil object, I'm going to enter the draw mode, so you should know how it works now. I'm going to add to create a small tree, a nice little happy tree. Okay, something like this. Just a quick note, I've made this stroke a bit thick. What I can do is I have a brush in the sculpt mode called thickness, and I can change the size of the brush, of the thickness of my stroke. But if I'm pressing Ctrl, I'm going to do the opposite. Okay, so with any brush, you can press Ctrl to get the opposite effect. Okay, so this is a tree, and this tree is going to have a new material, and this material is going to be something like this. And I can add the fill. No, the fill isn't working really well, but just to show you how it works, you can add the tree right there. And if even if I'm not saving, I can go to the edit, the video editing, and you will see that the tree is there because we are actually compositing the scene together. Not compositing, but we are actually merging the scene together. So this is a way to quickly create animatics or moving storyboards, if you would say. And if you want to export this as a final movie, you will just have to go to this option here, the output section of your of the properties editor, and you will have to change the resolution of your animation. So in this case, it's HD. You can change the percentage of the final size that you will output. You can say the first and end key of your animation, and you can, of course, here define a path, and you can change the file format for, let's say, FFmpeg video, and in the encoding here you can choose, for instance, let's say the container will be MPEG-4, and you can export a simple MP4 video. I won't do it in this case, but I'm going to save my whole file, and the cool thing is that now in one file I have everything. I have all my movie in one file, and of course you can do this in multiple files, but I think it's easier to do it in only one file. Okay? So what I want to do, as I promised, I want to show you a recent file. I just started out yesterday, and it's this one. It's a short animation that I plan to do, and as you can see, the idea is that the characters are in a museum. And if you, I'm going to move to this option, and as you can see, I've modeled really simple objects, so I don't have time to explain how modeling works in this video, but there are plenty of tutorials online. But I just wanted to show you how grease pencil was used. So in this case, you can see that I have a light here, and this is actual grease pencil strokes, but they are made they are made in a way that looks 3D. So for creating this kind of objects, what I've done is I've just drawn one stroke, and I've duplicated in edit mode and turned it around. As you can see, I've also drawn different paintings on the walls, and in order to do this, I've just, instead of using the view object, so I'm going to show you this one because it's pretty cool. So let's say that I have a sphere, UV sphere. If I want to create a new grease pencil object of type stroke, for instance, I'm going to enter in edit mode, remove everything, and in the draw mode here, I can, as I told you, project from view, etc. But I can also here say I want to place the stroke on top of the surface. So if I'm pressing this, as you can see now, I will draw on my surface. And this is how I done my paintings on my 3D frames. One other thing that I can do is I can push a bit my stroke on top of my surface like this, so it's only visible. But you can see there is a small gap between my stroke and my 3D object. So this is actually pretty cool, and this is the way I've done the paintings on the wall. You can see that I have an animated object here. I've created some motion, some camera motion. I have also another scene where I have a character moving around here. And yes, this is a pretty neat way to create stories. And this is for me just the beginning, so this is a really quick sneak peek of what will be, I hope, a final short film soon. But you can see that I've edited my shots in a master scene like I've done in the previous tutorial. So this tutorial was pretty long, I know, but I hope it was useful for you. This is actually my first tutorial in English, as I told you. Don't hesitate to comment below, don't hesitate to share tips with the others, and don't hesitate to share this video with your friends. I hope it was useful, and I would like to thank you for watching till the end. See you!